We've looked largely in the first video at what's going on domestically, the growth of the American system, judicial review, this growing sectionalism between North and South. Now I want to turn our attention and look at what's going on politically. The, the first major piece of this happens with the corrupt bargain of 1824. In the election of 1824, there are four major candidates: John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, William Crawford, and Andrew Jackson. Now, all of these candidates at this time are seen as having pretty good choices. However, John Quincy Adams was he's obviously the son of John Adams, the second president of the United States, so he had a lot of popularity there. You also have he is a really good statesman. He had worked his way up in Massachusetts politics. So what ultimately happens is he's seen as pretty favorable. Henry Clay is this guy who's obviously pretty important from Kentucky. He helps with the Missouri Compromise. He does a couple of big things that sort of get his name out there. William Crawford, lesser known, and then Andrew Jackson, obviously. So some of you might know he was a huge war hero in the War of 1812, defended New Orleans, and he's a really significant figure. Now, here's what happens. Jackson wins the popular vote. He doesn't win enough electoral college votes. So what happens is the top three candidates go to the House of Representatives. Clay is deemed out of it. So the fight really comes down to Jackson versus Adams. Clay hates Jackson. Jackson is just like Clay is a sort of frontier Southerner, but they don't get along. Jackson's seen as too rough and tumble. Clay is a little bit more dignified. So Clay winds up encouraging his representatives to vote for Adams. Adams wins, and Adams becomes president. Now, Adams' presidency is really not terribly important to us. Moving ahead to the election of 1828, though, what happens is Jackson is really focusing on beating Adams, and this becomes sort of a mudslinging election. John Quincy Adams, is just destroyed in this election. He's seen as corrupt. He's seen as sort of uninterested Northeasterner, sort of old hat, old family. Right, his father was president. Now he's president. It's really sort of a mudslinging event, and Jackson ultimately winds up winning. And again, he sort of going along that sectionalism. He wins the election really with no northern support, really all south and western support. When he becomes president, though, one of the big things that happens with Jackson's presidency is that he really focuses on trying to get the common man in. He's seen as a commoner. He is the first president from the frontier, but he's also, he's not well educated. He doesn't have, sort of elite college degrees, which all the presidents that preceded him would have had. Washington accepted, but Washington had extensive military careers. I guess same like Jackson. So when he becomes president, one of the things that happens is people see again this idea of the common man becoming president, but he also keeps the spoil system. He awards those people who had supported him with governmental positions, and this is seen as a good thing. He also winds up helping Southerners by supporting policies that they would ultimately like. So one of the things that had helped Jackson get elected was his opposition to something called the Tariff of Abominations. In May of 1828, President John Quincy Adams signed into effect a tariff that was extremely high on manufactured goods coming from abroad. Now, the purpose of this, ostensibly, was to support American factories and American industry. Now, the impact of this, though, for the country was that it made manufactured goods from Britain very expensive. And for people from the South who didn't have this type of industry locally, they were very unfavored. They did not favor this tariff. And Jackson really wound up campaigning on that policy of trying to get rid of it. So when he becomes president, he winds up working to get rid of it. Now, this sort of illustrates the disagreement between the different sections of the United States. This shows that the South is continuing to have a little bit less of an agreement with the North. But even more importantly, this is seen as an affront to the ideas of slavery. And because the South's economy was so based on slavery and agriculture, anything that supported industry was seen as an affront to the agricultural production of the South. So John C. Calhoun, along with others, winds up trying to push back from federal or national incursions because it's seen as the federal government is just not supporting the South. Again, another piece of this, trying to open up more land to slavery. In the 1820s, particularly in 1828, they start moving more and more Native Americans out of Georgia, Tennessee, southern states to make room for more Americans to establish slavery. And the worst event of this is the Trail of Tears, during which about 125 Native Americans are moved off of land of their traditional lands in Georgia, Mississippi, parts of Florida, and they are moved Tennessee and moved to other parts of the country like Nebraska, what would become Nebraska. Georgia, major lawsuits begin happening, and unfortunately, the Native American. This is sort of a stain on American history. Native Americans are ultimately kicked off their land because of this. Finally, the sort of last, big thing here is the election of 1832. 1832, Jackson wins in a massive landslide because he's been seen as sort of the voice of the common man. He's defending the South, defending those states' rights ideas. Again, people are huge fans of him. The last thing I want to look at here are just the documents that you're going to be engaging with, right? So you have a couple of you have a Supreme Court case here looking at sort of John Marshall describing what's the important piece of sort of American policy towards judicial review, the supremacy of the federal government. Lesser talked about here, but the Monroe Doctrine establishing the United States as sort of protector of the Western Hemisphere. The last thing I want you to look at here is Jackson and the bank veto. This is where Jackson is really defending sort of his decision to not allow the government to establish a bank, or at least the second bank of the United States under Nicholas Biddle.